Okay, last week we started the book of Esther and we covered chapters 1 through 5. So today we're going to finish the book of Esther. And I'd like to just review what happened in chapters 1 through 5. And in fact, by the way, people that don't have these, I got a whole bunch of them, especially the kids in the back, should probably have these.
Also, whenever he says the name Haman, you're supposed to drown it out with using these noisemakers. Boo.
This is a Gregor. This is what they use in synagogues. And this one doesn't work. Oh man, in the old days they made them right. And they were irritating, and I don't know if they just don't make them so well these days, or I just got one that wasn't made well. Anyway, okay, as usual, when you get a holiday, you've got some biblical basis and a whole lot of added custom. Oh, okay. And
you got one? Okay.
This is going on. Okay, thanks. The timeline, remember that when the second temple was going to be built, and I was reading about that this week. Cyrus, the Persian, he had an idea. Let's let people go back to the lands that they had been displaced from. And he would gain popularity with people and it wouldn't cost him anything. Okay? Now, Zerubbabel came in 537 BC. These are approximate years. Some sources might vary by a few years. The second temple was completed 30 years before Esther, so we're giving Esther a time frame of the return to build the second temple. About 483 BC is the book of Esther, at least when it starts. Ezra came in 457 BC, and Nehemiah built the wall in 444 BC. So this is during that time. But remember, the Jews had been carried to Babylon, Jews in the southern kingdom, and most of them didn't return. They had settled down, it was comfortable, why go back? And so, now, let's see what happened. In the book of Esther, chapter 1, King Ahasuerus, never heard of Ahasuerus till I went to Bible school. We called him Ahasuerus in Hebrew school and everything. Okay? He has a feast that lasts 180 days. That's about half a year. Before he goes out, again, some background that isn't mentioned in the Bible, and has a campaign against the Greeks, which he lost. But anyway, I guess the idea was have a feast, maybe, I might come back alive, whatever. Okay? Now, he and his buddies are drinking, and he tells Vashti, the queen, come and show off your beauty. And she says no. Okay? So, he took the advice of a really insecure guy in the funniest passage in all the Bible, in my opinion, called Mimichan, who said, hey, our wives aren't going to listen to us. All over the kingdom, the wives aren't going to listen to the men if she gets away with this. So, dump her. Esther 1:16. Okay? So, anyway, he goes on his campaign. Okay? And he comes back a defeated man. And he remembered Vashti, what she'd done, and decided, we really need a new person as queen. Now, he probably had a whole bunch of wives anyway. It's typical in the Old Testament. I mean, even David, starts out basically with one wife, all of a sudden grabs another one. Solomon was ridiculous. But this is typical back there. But you typically have one favorite wife, and when you're old, that's the only one you care about. And Moshe Dayan, in his autobiography, mentioned a friend of his that died with his favorite wife by his side, an Arab friend. The Arabs and the Palestinians now can marry 4 people, and they sometimes do. But typically, as you're old, there's only one you really care about, like David and Bathsheba, for instance. And I mentioned there is this book of Esther they call Megillat Esther, the Scroll of Esther. And it's one of the 5 scrolls. I actually showed you that book last week with Song of Songs. Christians call it the Song of Solomon. Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, and Esther. And This Ahasuerus was also known as Xerxes, who was Zoroastrian. In the 20th year of his reign, he was assassinated. He inherited the vast Persian Empire from his father, and he was planning for the doomed invasion of Greece, which would take place several years later. Athens was in its glory. This gives you a time frame. At that time, the Persian Empire was the largest the world had ever seen. And anyway, Esther became queen. He held a beauty contest, and she won. It's probably more than the beauty contest, considering it says in the Bible she went in the night and came out in the day.
Yes.
Okay? So, more than just beauty. And she had to wait a whole year before she even went to him. That way, they could know that if she has a baby, it's not Ahasuerus' baby because she hasn't even seen him. In chapter 3, Haman was promoted. And Haman expected people to bow down to him. And Mordecai would not, yeah, Haman. Mordecai would not. Now, it might not be worship. I mean, we see Abraham bowing down. There's respect and there's worship, and they're not quite the same thing. So it's, you could debate was he really wanted to be worshipped or not. But he couldn't stand it, and he found out this Mordecai that won't bow down to him is Jewish. And remember that Haman comes from the Agag, okay? In other words, King Agag was an Amalekite, and we went over the verses last week about God wanting the Amalekites completely destroyed, which Saul didn't do. And so there was a lot of bad blood between these people. In other words, Haman's thinking, this is the guy whose ancestors tried to wipe out my ancestors. And he said, I'm going to kill all the Jews. Wasn't even trying to stamp out Judaism, just wanted the Jews died. And he was obsessed with this. And in chapter 4, Mordecai, he wanted all the Jews killed, and he convinced King Ahasuerus, yeah, there's people here that their customs are different. And let's say Esther 3:8, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of the kingdom, true. And their laws are diverse from all people, true. Neither keep they the king's laws, false. There you have anti-Semitism. They're different, they dress differently, they eat differently, they're different, true, and they're no good to the country, false. Hitler did it, on and on it goes. That's the essence of anti-Semitism. We hate these people, and actually they haven't done anything wrong, but let's pretend that they have, that they're a threat to the kingdom. Okay, so Mordecai finds out about it, and he communicates to Esther. Mordecai's out, Esther is now queen. She's in the palace, Mordecai's in the gate, and they were still able to communicate, hey, Esther, I'm your uncle, I've raised you, and guess what? Haman wants to kill off all the Jews, and you're not going to be safe yourself. Now, she hadn't told anyone she was Jewish, at least not the king, because Mordecai had told her that. Now, that's Mordecai.
Yeah, yay, Mordecai.
And Mordecai told her that. And I grew up with the same thing. My father saying, don't tell people you're Jewish. You don't look it, they don't have to know. Because he grew up in a time when it was difficult for Jews. He told me he was the only Jew in his high school besides his brother Mel. And it was a time of vicious, virulent anti-Semitism in this country during World War II, for instance. They were blaming the Jews for the war. We had anti-Semitic State Department, a president who kind of wanted to help out but acquiesced to peer pressure and stuff, political pressure, really. In fact, like I mentioned last week, because some of you weren't here, when my father visited me at my PhD program at Texas Tech University, he saw my resume, it says I know Hebrew. He said, nope, he wanted that off the resume that I knew Hebrew. Okay, so anyway, now we are looking at, so there's a banquet. Esther says, I go to this guy. Now they couldn't have even been sharing the same bedroom, even though she was the queen, because she said, if I see him, he doesn't want to talk to me, I'm dead. Okay? So, he hasn't called people in a while to see him. And then Mordecai says, if you don't think you're going to escape. He doesn't know you're Jewish, but you're not going to escape this. If I perish, I perish. He goes in and sees him. He holds out the scepter, and she says, I want a banquet. And I'm going to invite you and Haman and... Okay, banquet of wine. Then the king says to Esther at the banquet of wine in Esther 5:6, what is thy petition? It shall be granted thee. And what is their request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Remember, Herodias' dancing daughter, by the way, whose name was Salome, even though that's not found in the Bible, you have to go to Josephus for that. Herod said the same thing, and this was Herod Antipas, by the way, not Herod the Great. It was one of Herod the Great's sons. It's obviously, Herod probably knew that from the Bible, and as any guy knows, hey, wife, you can have half of it, the kids get the other half. You'd have to raise kids maybe to completely understand that, but anyway, and maybe she balks, maybe she's scared, and King Ahasuerus says, what do you want? She says, a second banquet tomorrow night. Okay? Now, we're going to start out with Esther 6:1. That's the backup. That's the background. We did that last week. Now, and I passed out those sheets about chiasm, and it's incredible chiasm. There were perhaps one source I read said it could be 2,000 chiasms in the Bible. Here's an example to those that weren't here last week. Adam and Eve sin. God says, Adam, where are you? He blames the wife, she blames the serpent. God curses in the opposite order. Serpent, woman, man. There's a particular psalm, Judges 3-16 is a narrative where the 7 major judges, actually one isn't even really a judge. And the first is like the 7th, and the second's like the 6th, and the third is like the 5th in several ways.
Could you define chiasm again for us?
There's a definition, and I can't remember it, but basically you're going up this way and coming down on the other side as opposites, like a mirror image. There's a bunch of those. I don't think you find it in the epistles because it's a Semitic style. Actually, God set this up several times. And the epistles are written basically to Gentiles for the most part. But you see it time and time again in the Bible where God says A, B, C, D might be a pivot point, then C prime, B prime, A prime. It's a style. God set it up in history. Only God could pull off this, and especially what you see in Judges. It is so complex. 18 years on each side of the chiasm. The first judge has a godly father-in-law, and things go down after the fourth one. The fourth one's a pivot point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The 7th one has an ungodly father-in-law. It's a whole page I got on that. There's a particular definition of chiasm. I can't remember what it is. I should have brought it. Anyway, you see this chiasm, so I'm going to be mentioning this. Okay, here is the pivot point. Now, X. We've seen A, B, C, D, E, F. Here's X. Haman humiliated and Mordecai exalted. Esther 6.
Hey, Mordecai.
Okay, now remember, also Haman had built a gallows to hang Mordecai. Esther 6:1. On that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigtana and Teresh, 2 of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hands on the king Ahasuerus. By the way, that's back in Esther chapter 2. And the king said, what honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this? See, Mordecai mentioned a plot to kill him, and it was written down. Then the king's servants that ministered unto him, then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, there is nothing done for him. And the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's servants said unto him, behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, this high-ranking Persian noble a real egomaniac. And the king said unto him, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, to whom would the king delight to honor more than to myself? Talk about ego. The ego has landed. And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delighteth to honor, he's thinking of himself, let the royal apparel be brought which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man withal whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, thus shall be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Then the king said to Haman, make haste, and take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew. So they knew Mordecai was Jewish. That sitteth at the king's gate. That's where he used to hang out. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaimed before him, this is Shushan the palace. Some Bibles say Susa. Thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor. And Mordecai came again to the king's gate. But Haman hastened to his house mourning, and having his head covered. And Haman told Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh his wife unto him, if Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him. That is real wisdom. Yeah. That really is. And when they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains, and hastened to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. Remember, this is her second banquet. Now, F prime, we're going uphill now. You can look on your cheat sheets. Esther's second banquet, and Haman executed instead of Mordecai. Esther 7:1. So the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition, Queen Esther, and it shall be granted thee? And what is thy request, and it shall be performed even to the half of the kingdom? The kids get the other half. Then Esther the queen, well, never mind. Then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. Now she's telling him what she is. He didn't know she was Jewish. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Remember, Medes and Persians wrote a law, you could not reverse it, you could not change it. We've actually done that with our Constitution, by the way. Prohibition, then it was repealed. Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen, who is he, and where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. And Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden, into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed where on Esther was. Bed, you got to think of a couch. You know, it's a banquet. It's not like where you go to sleep necessarily. Then said the king, will he force the king also before me in the house? He's thinking, this guy's trying to rape the queen. As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Obviously, there were other people there. You know, you could have bodyguards if you were king, because you're going to spend your whole life paranoid anyway. And Habona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king. Remember, Mordecai had turned in a plot against the king's life. Standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that they had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. Okay, now we're seeing this chiasm. Now E prime, Esther and Mordecai planned to reverse the decree. Okay, there was a decree made before, and now they're going to try to reverse it. And if you actually look at E, Esther and Mordecai's, okay, plan to reverse the decree. Yeah, this goes with the plan that they had. Okay, E is the plan. E primed is carrying out the plan. Okay, now, so Esther 1:8 went through. No.
8:1.
Yeah, 8:1. Okay. On that day did King Ahasuerus give the house of Haman the Jews' enemy under Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told him what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring which he had taken from Haman and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spake yet again before the king and fell down on his feet and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite in his device that he devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter towards Esther, and I'm supposed to be like King Ahasuerus, but I don't have my golden scepter. I used it as a, never mind. I used it to help Trump buy his bond. Anyway, then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther, so Esther arose and stood before the king. Again, she's risking her life, but by now he kind of likes her. And said, if it please the king, and if I found favor in his sight, and the thing seemed right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come upon my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews as it liketh you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. Now this is crucial, for the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse. We see this elsewhere in the Bible. The Medes and the Persians, again, when they had a law, it could not be reversed. So, people are going to attack, but here's the new law, you can defend yourself. Then were the king's scribes called at that time in the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, on the 23rd day. Remember, they got to the 12th month, Adar, before this attack's going to happen. 23rd day thereof, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and the deputies and rulers of the provinces which are from India unto Ethiopia, and 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing, according to their language. He wants to make sure everyone can read it. Get 127 provinces, huge empire, you can have all kinds of languages being spoken. Mm-hmm. A friend of mine lives in Memphis and says there are 100 languages spoken in Memphis. That's just Memphis.
Oh my God.
When I lived in Brockton, Massachusetts, we had people speaking English, Spanish, Portuguese, Greek. I mean, and we were talking a huge empire. And he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by post on horseback and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries. Now we're looking at D prime, really starting at verse 9. Mordecai's counter decree to save the Jewish people. Okay? And again, it's opposite D, which is Haman's decree to destroy the Jewish people. Now here's Mordecai's counter decree to save the Jewish people. See that chiasm? Wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people in province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar. The copy of the writing, remember Esther 3, that was Esther 3:13. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves and their enemy. So the post that rode upon the mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment, the old-fashioned pony express. And the decree was given at Shushan the palace. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, right here, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. They weren't perplexed like they were before. The Jews had light and joy, and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, and a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Now, when I talk about the Jewish background of the Bible, I like to get into what is a Jew. It started out with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. A lot of people became Jews, so it's in a sense a race, but not a pure race. I mean, that's how you got to look at it. In fact, when Moses left Egypt, there was a mixed multitude with them.
Yes.
But still, you can trace it genetically. I had a guy show up. I went to this book fair at Tennessee Temple University when I was a prof there. The guy looks at me, sees me for the first time. He says, "You're Jewish, right?" He could tell by my eyes. Okay? I can tell when I look at these black and white pictures of what's going on in the Holocaust and stuff like that, I can see the Jews right off the bat. And those are all black and white pictures. You can tell. Because, especially the Ashkenazi Jews, at least in my case. Yeah. Now, B prime, Queen Esther and Mordecai saved the Jewish people. That's Esther 9, 1 through 19. Now B prime, remember Esther becomes queen in B, in Esther chapter 1 through 1:9 through 2:23, Esther becomes queen and Mordecai saves the king. Now Queen Esther and Mordecai save the Jewish people. That's B prime. Self-defense. Now in the 12th month, that is the month Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put in execution, in the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, that what was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over them that hated them. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus to lay hand on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all the people. And all the rulers of the provinces and the lieutenants and the deputies and officers of the king helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. See that written about David too, by the way. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with a stroke of the sword, in slaughter and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. And in Shushan the palace the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men. In Pashanadata, in Dalphon, in Aspata, in Parata, in Adalia, in Aridata, in Parmashta, in Arisai, in Aidai, in Vayesata, the 10 sons of Haman. See, my brother you're supposed to read as quickly as you can, and my brother read it so quickly no one caught it. You're supposed to drown that out too. The 10 sons of Haman, the sons of Hamadata, the enemy of the Jews slew they, but on the spoil they laid not their hand. See, they weren't. The king granted in 8:11 to take spoil, but the Jews wouldn't take the spoil. They wouldn't take the spoil of Haman's sons, and you're going to see this again. On that day, the number of those that were slain in Shushan the palace was brought before the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? You know, that's just the capital. Now, what is thy petition, and it shall be granted thee? Or what is thy request further, and it shall be done? Then said Esther, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow also according to this day's decree. And let Haman's 10 sons being hanged upon the gallows. Okay? Now, Haman's sons were already killed. They sometimes hang people after they kill them. If you look, burning at the stake, they'll strangle them first, they're dead, and then they burn them at the stake. Okay?
Oh, wow.
And what I've read in one commentary was that it might not have been hanging gallows like we think. It might have been impaled on a stake. But in any case, once people are dead, sometimes they hang them up as an example to everybody. We've so gotten away from that now. Our work, we got, we had a serial killer who's the most infamous inmate in the prison. He killed a guy to get in, and he killed more when he's in the prison system, and he's still alive. I think his killing days are over. He doesn't kill staff, and he warns you before he kills you. And I think he knows if he does it again, he's probably going to get, the electric chair or something. So they shackle him up. He comes out and keeps the hub office in high security clean. Interesting guy, real psychopath. Some people are meant to be to kill. In other words, they're meant to be killed. But anyway, we're just so far from capital punishment. You hear the news now. The marathon bomber. Okay, Supreme Court said you can kill him. Biden said, well, we're putting executions on hold, federal executions, because he committed a federal crime. And now they're saying, well, it should go back to trial because there might have been prejudice in the jury. You know what they did in Nuremberg? They tried him and they hung him one after the other. Boom, boom, boom. I'm not even talking politics per se, saying people should die. I'm just saying it's hard for us to understand this because we're so detached from it, at least in reality. If you're out in the streets with the gangs, you kill my brother, I'm going to kill yours. But in the justice system, where there's very little justice at times, doesn't always happen. Now, verse 14, and the king commanded it so to be done, and the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. But the Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month Adar. Remember, they had the 13th day, but in Shushan, they were allowed the 14th day. And slew 300 men at Shushan, but on the prey they laid not their hand. They weren't trying to get rich off this, they were simply trying to make a point and defend themselves. But the other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together and stood for their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and slew of their foes 75,000. Okay, 75,000 is a lot of people. Of course, that, several hundred just in the capital. But they laid not their hands on the prey. They weren't... See, when people have kicked the Jews out of countries in Europe and stuff, and the Nazis and everything, what they would try to get all the gold and everything they could, The Jews are saying, no, it's defense. We're not going to take anything from these people. On the 13th day of the month Adar, and on the 14th day of the same rested they, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews that were in Shushan assembled together on the 13th day thereof, and on the 14th day thereof. And on the 15th day of the same, they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. So you got that in the provinces. You defend yourself on Adar 13, celebrate on Adar 14. In Shushan the palace, you defend yourselves on Adar 13 and 14, and celebrate on day 15. Therefore, the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns, and this is important even for today, a little bit, made the 14th day of the month Adar day of...
What verse are you at? Where are you?
Esther 9:19.
9:19.
Day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, and of sending portions one to another. Okay, now, A prime, 2 feasts in the splendor of Mordecai. Okay, we're going to finish with that. And again, if you look at A, is the splendor of the Persian king in 2 banquets. Now we have A prime, 2 feasts in the splendor of Mordecai. Do you see how chiasms work? Man, if we ever went through Judges, it's incredible all the stuff that matches. Good on one side, bad on another, because the children of Israel went downhill during Judges. You get really good judges, and you get Gideon, and you get some bad judges. Anyway, like Samson, just sort of failed in his calling to some extent. But anyway, verse 20, okay, as we enter A prime. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both nigh and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, in the 15th day of the same yearly, as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, in the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. See, this is a festive holiday. It is not a solemn holiday like Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them, because Haman the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast spore, that is the lot, to consume them. That was to change, choose the date. They used lots, and to destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked device, which he devised against the Jews, should return upon his own head, and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore they call these days Purim, after the name of Pua. Therefore, for all the words of this letter, and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come unto them, the Jews ordained and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves unto them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing, and according to their appointed time every year. By the way, if you ever see someone say they shouldn't have kept it, it wasn't part of the law of Moses, you've got an anti-Semite, a white supremacist on your hands. They will say this. The Jews weren't keeping the law of Moses in this case, so it isn't in the law of Moses. It's still in the Bible, okay? And I've run into this when you run into people who hate Jews. Oh, they kept Hanukkah, maybe, That's not in the Bible, and actually Jesus did keep it, but, they're establishing another holiday as part of the law of Moses. How can you say they're keeping the law of Moses? These self-appointed experts on Judaism that really just want all the Jews dead. Okay? Verse 28. And that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote with all authority to confirm the second letter of Purim. And he sent the letters unto all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim in their times appointed, according as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had joined them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of the fastings in their cry. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. And the king Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the land and upon the isles of the sea, in all the acts of his power and his might, in the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? Which I don't have, maybe someone's got them somewhere. For Mordecai the Jew was next unto him. You see the typology. Mordecai represents Jesus Christ. King Ahasuerus represents God the Father. You just have to ignore Ahasuerus' sins. And great among the Jews, and accepted the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace unto all his seed. Now, let's look at the typology. Haman is the one way of looking at it. Haman is the old nature. Mordecai is the new nature. Ahasuerus is God the Father. Esther is the human spirit. The old nature wins out over the new nature. Medo-Persian law could not be changed. Folks, when Adam and Eve fell in the garden, okay, welcome to Haman, but guess what? That is not changed. Now, when we go to heaven, we are no longer in the body of sin, so we don't have a sin nature, and we'll get glorified bodies which do not have a sin nature. But God himself could not or did not reverse the curse. He did not reverse the fact that we have sin natures. We now have a new nature, like Mordecai, that can win over the old nature, which is Haman. But we still have those natures battling within us. We're born in original sin. That can't be changed. but we can get a new nature to fight the old nature and eventually replace it. Now, Purim today. Pur is Persian for lot. It's only controversial among certain Christians because it's not found in the law of Moses, and Jews across the spectrum all seem to embrace it. You could say, was Purim divinely inspired or not? Well, the Jews ordained in verse 9:27 and took upon them. And I think, God didn't say keep the holiday. It was just a custom. I think it was, when it comes to inspiration, it's not God saying, Moses, these are your 7 feasts. It's later when the Jews simply did it. But God isn't mentioned in here. Again, the reasons being, maybe someone wanted to show God's providence. Unlikely it was written by a pagan author. More likely it was written at a time when you couldn't say God. A time and a place. I have been there when I was underground. I remember hiding behind a tree at night to listen to a Bible study. I remember meeting secretly every night for like half a year.
Where was this?
Israel.
How come?
Because we were a group of missionaries that could have been thrown out. That's why. And by the way, we were caught. They were praying for us in the U.S. and there was a spy at the meeting who, I think it went like this, they called Boston. And Framingham, here's how we heard it later. Here's what happened. Me and the team leader were walking and called into an office on the kibbutz. We know who you are. And this lady read off the list of all 8 of us on that team, that mission team. She looked at me because I was the biggest one, probably thought I was the leader. Well, first she said, what you doing, and this is all in Hebrew, what you do in your free time, I don't care. But when the religious ones come on, in other words, the religious Jews that would come on to try to proselytize the non-religious Jews and make them more religious, come on the kibbutz, I kick them off. She looks at me, I look at the leader, he says, when people ask us a question, we answer. That was it, we walked out. Now every 3 months, you've got to get new visas. We figure that's it. So it made us a little bolder. 3 months, 3 months were up, we got visas, got them again another 3 months later. We found out later, here's how I heard it. Someone in a service in Framingham, Massachusetts, where they used to have, there was an organization there and they would have like Bible studies, meetings basically on Friday nights in Framingham, the Frost Street, Charlotte Dunning School. Someone heard them praying for us, I guess called Boston, who called New York, who called Jerusalem, who called Tel Aviv, something like that.
Wow.
And it came to us. But I've been there. And you talk in code. There are still meetings having to do with some of those people, and some of that's in code. Okay? And it might be, just might be, that you couldn't really come out and say, God, if you're writing this at a time when religions, Judaism is underground. I could go on about this. It's happened to me in the U.S. But a Christian would not use the word of God. He would talk to me, and in case we were overheard, considering where we were, he would just say something else. But this is going public. I'm not going to say too much. And that's very likely what happened. Anyway, it's a festive, not a solemn holiday. Kids dress up like characters in the book of Esther. You go to Sunday school. By the way, with me, it was Sunday school and Sunday morning, and in Hebrew school, either Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday, after public school. Okay? So it's like 3 days a week. But basically, the little kids get dressed up, and you generally look, and you dress up like a character from the book of Esther. So generally, it's Haman, Mordecai, Esther, Vashti, Ahasuerus. Because basically, Memuhan, kids don't even know who that is. In the synagogue, they read the whole book of Esther, Scroll of Esther. When you're Haman, you drown out Haman's name, and this is such a piece of junk. But anyway, it's called a Gregor, which is Yiddish for rattler. When Haman's 10 sons are named, the reader reads them as quickly as possible, and the Gregors drown out the names. Unless it's my brother, he reads them so quickly. Okay, Hasidim smoke and do other things they don't usually do. This is a great article, and I finally was able to buy this thing at what do you call it? Not Kairos, Karn, right? Where they sell all this used stuff in Knoxville. Okay, 1975 issue of National Geographic. University libraries, by the way, they'll have these bound like half a year at a time. Incredible stuff when you read National Geographic. You go back in time and it's, wow. But anyway, this is about the Hasidim in Williamsburg, New York. Now, this is August 1975. And they show, but on Purim it's okay. Two Hasidic lads step out of the rain to light up a smoke during the holiday of Purim. They're in a phone booth. Do kids even know what phone booths are these days? Okay. On this traditional day of merrymaking, good-natured mischief reigns. Youngsters puff cigarettes and don costumes, while their elders, winking at usual restraints against excessive alcoholic consumption, down frequent glasses of wine or slivovitz, a fiery plum brandy. This is an excellent article on Hasidic Jews. By the way, before I was able to buy my own copy, I was in a library in Colorado, Steamboat Springs, and a librarian scanned all these so I get PDFs of everything. But now I finally get this. I first saw it at my parents' house. It was right before Israel my first time. Okay, now, in Hebrew, and I tried to buy these, man. Kroger didn't have them. Walmart didn't have them. I could have bought them online, but I was afraid if they're moldy or something like that, and how do you send them back? So I didn't buy any. Homentashen, 3-cornered. The Talmud even encourages excessive drinking for this day. But Homentashen, 3-cornered Danish. I wrote Danish pastry. They're not really Danish. I kept saying Danish last time. It's made with a type of dough. My wife tried to make some, and it just was a complete flop. She tried to make some last night. Resemble the hats that Persian nobles wore. This is 3-cornered. You know, remember the Minutemen, the American Revolution? If you ever see, by the way, the old Boston Patriots logo with a Minuteman hiking the ball with one hand, he's got a 3-cornered hat on, Massachusetts Minuteman. Okay, that's the kind of hat. So we eat these. They're not pastries. It's just a doughy thing with... Here's what it is. The classic Hamantash was always filled with poppy seeds. I would flunk a random drug test at work if I had poppy seeds, probably. Haman, the Haman, can refer either to the wicked Haman or poppy seeds, which are mown. Homentashen. And the Yiddish word tash means pocket. Thus, Homentashen means poppy seed-filled pockets. I guess it's sort of a pun, but I think a lot of times a word comes out. In Judaism, this happens. A word comes out, and then you kind of find another word, some reason to make it something else.
Make it a joke.
Now, not just a joke, but
Like slang.
I call it Christian Kabbalism. Okay? How many raptures, and I'm not mocking the second advent, how many raptures have I survived in my life? I had a list of them the first time I wrote a book and published it. And there have been more since then. We play these games with words and numbers and come up to all these things that don't come to pass.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And some of this stuff is taking words and just, maybe it means this, but it also means that. Jewish people like to do it, and unfortunately Christians fall for the same nonsense. I have survived too many raptures. It's an embarrassment to the church. Jesus is coming back in 1988. Here's 88 reasons or something. It's embarrassing. I read a book that he was going to come back in Rosh Hashanah 1975. And years later, I saw the book in a window of a Bible bookstore or some kind of religious store. You guys read the book and realize it's no good? But anyway, in Hebrew, Homentashen are also known as Oznei Haman, meaning Haman's ears. Haman's ears also refers to the Sephardic Purim pastry, Orejas de Haman, thought to originate in Spain and Italy, that is made by frying twisted or rolled strips of dough. You got to realize that in the U.S., Ashkenazi Judaism prevails. In other words, people came from Eastern and Central Europe. The first Jews officially, in a sense, in the U.S. were Sephardic Jews coming from Brazil, 23 of them that went up to New Amsterdam before New York. And Peter Stuyvesant didn't want them, but there was pressure on him. He had to keep them. But there also have been Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, known to at least be in the continent before then. But in any case, Sephardic Jews are generally, they're the ones kicked out of the Iberian Peninsula. Spain, they were kicked out in 1492, and in Portugal they were kicked out, I think it was 1497. And they went to different places in the Mediterranean, like the Balkans and stuff. They ran into a third group of Jews called Mizrahi Jews, or Eastern Jews, Arab Jews, people that have been living in Arab countries, Jews. And they somehow mixed, kind of intermarried with some of them because they were in the same location. But it's, when you actually look at the Sephardic customs, they're different than what I grew up with, because they developed in different parts of the world, like Yemen, Babylon, Jewish community in Babylon for a long time, I think until very recently. That's why when the Bible's New Testament epistles talk about, there's one thing, and I don't mean Revelation, but Babylon, people say, oh, that must mean Rome. No, there were Jews in Babylon till probably the 18th, I think the Jews were cleared out of most of the Middle East in the 1940s. Okay. But anyway, some of their customs are different. And it has led to some tension in Israel. These two groups meet, and the Sephardic Jews, the ones airlifted out of Yemen, for instance, that were real Arab Jews, Mizrahi Jews. In 1949, they hadn't seen airplanes, they hadn't seen stairs. The old days you went up in stairs to get to the airplane before the modern tarmacs. Probably, I read a lady, she said, I was a girl and I saw stairs for the first time. I figured it's probably getting up into the airplane. But they didn't have the same educational level, they had different customs, they had the same sanitation level. And so there was really some conflict. And I think David Ben Gurion wanted Ashkenazi culture, in fact I know he did, to prevail. We, Russian and German Jews and stuff like that, our culture is going to predominate, and not these Sephardic Jews who are darker skinned and were prejudiced against. Okay, there have been issues. It's never come to the kind of full-fledged riots or killings or anything, but it's still there. Anyway, the holiday of Purim falls on the Hebrew calendar date of Adar 14. Now, here are the coinciding secular dates for this year. It begins sundown tonight, concludes sundown tomorrow night. In fact, this is a Jewish calendar. I mean, it's got our months, but it's also got the Jewish months. And today, Erev Purim evening. And anyway, let's see. I mean, it tells you when the months start, the new moons and everything.
Technically, right about now, it's almost sundown in Israel.
Yeah, that's true.
To start Purim.
Now, here's where it gets a little more complicated. If you could just keep things simple, but religion doesn't like to do that. When do you celebrate Purim? On the 14th or the 15th? Shushan was the 14th, was the 15th. Here's what I found. At some point, the sages, as they call them, decided, okay, Jerusalem is a big city, and it's walled, and at least it was in the days of Esther. And they're kind of getting ripped off. So here we are, Shushan, the best I can understand this from what I read is this, Shushan, you have the couple of days of celebration that go a day later. But let's honor Jerusalem by doing the same things. So they looked at all the villages or the cities that were walled at the time of Joshua's conquest. Okay? Jerusalem was a tough city for David to take. It was walled. So that's walled. Let's make him celebrate it like Shushan, a day later. Okay? Anything that was walled, I remember it from reading on the internet, anything that was walled at the time of the conquest got to celebrate on the 15th. Any villages or unwalled cities in Israel were celebrated normally, like most of the Persian Empire back then, on the 14th. They wanted what was going on in Shushan to sort of extend to Jerusalem, and I got a whole list of probably over a dozen cities where that applies to. Never mind what's happening then, when they came back to the Jerusalem, you know, at the time of Esther, the walls had been taken down. Remember, Nehemiah had to rebuild them. So they look at the time of the conquest, which cities were walled, which cities weren't. In those cities, and it even gets more complicated, like they read the book of Esther, but you don't get the blessing. There's no blessing or something. You know, I didn't quite understand all that. But basically, this is what we do, at least outside Israel. You know, I don't know exactly what they're doing in Israel now. Now.
Might as well milk it for all you can.
Yeah. I mean, things can get complicated. Now, can we see the typology of Revelation 11:15? And the seventh angel, I don't know why I put this in there. And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. Yeah, that's kind of like the end of the book of Esther. Here's what it is. We see in ourselves, there's a Haman and there's a Mordecai. Okay? Remember, Rebecca gets pregnant. And there's, what's going on? She goes to God. There are twins in your womb. They turn out to be Jacob and Esau. Esau representing the old nature, Jacob representing the new nature. In us, there is that battle every day. Okay? The elder shall serve the younger. You know, eventually, Jacob is going to win. And what we see here, you can see that typologically as far as what's going on inside us. The end of the book of Esther, everything's working out fine. Just like Revelation. Everything finally works out. You have two kingdoms fighting. The kingdoms of this world, Haman, and the kingdoms of our Lord, Mordecai. You see how that it works inside us, but it's also two kingdoms. Okay? The devil was not called Lucifer. That's a putrid. That's not even a translation. That was Jerome, who didn't like a guy named Lucifer and put his name in something. He'll put his name in the Bible because it had been interpreted to be the devil, even though God said the king of Babylon, who happened to have a name. But it's been interpreted, and it probably as part of the fall in the heavenlies. And I'm not denying that. It's a lot of typology. But Jerome in the Latin Vulgate had a theological enemy named Lucifer. So since the Hebrew is sort of has to do with something bright and shiny, and Lucifer is Latin for light bearer, he put it in. Okay, remember, there's no Latin term in the Bible. There isn't the King James. Not in the Hebrew or the Greek. I don't think you'll find one. Or the Aramaic. But anyway, especially those names. You know, great is Diana of the Ephesians. No, her name isn't Diana in the Bible. It's Artemis. You read in Greek. Mercury, Jupiter. That's not what it says in the Greek. Those are the Latin names. Because King James that I use was translated in the Elizabethan age. And that's what they like to do. But anyway, Satan is the prince of the power of the air in Ephesians 2:2. The God of this world in 1 Corinthians 4:4. Nowhere does the Bible say the planet was turned over to the devil. That's a church teaching, so that in Revelation, you know, when there's a scroll, it's supposedly the title deed to the earth, and no man can open it. No, because Psalm says the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Satan was not given the planet, but the philosophies, the world system has been given to him. Okay, this pagan world system. By the way, all this still about trans, this and that, that's all paganism. It's nothing new. You get some old idol and God's got a knife in his hand. Guess what that is? That's making a man a woman. It's nothing new. A whole lot of the things we think, oh, abortion, think that's anything new? But all this trans and everything, changing your gender, that goes way back. That's paganism. And the devil has that world system, but he does not own the planet. The earth is the Lord's. Okay? Now, I was going to bring some Hamantash in. Oh, by the way, for those of you looking out in the YouTube land, I was trying to get a costume, and it would come from Amazon, and the shipping would take so long, I didn't even think I'd get it in time. And so I didn't get it, okay? This was fitted here. I guess I'm King Ahasuerus. Of course, this crown doesn't fit on my head anyway. But adults and kids have come here dressed up for this as different characters. So I'm going to ask them if they want to parade in front of the camera so that everyone can see this. And mine's falling off. I feel like Gone with the Wind. You know, the lady takes the curtains and makes a dress. So come on and parade in front of the camera. Or I can turn the camera if I need to. But it's facing this. Want me to turn the camera?
I want you to lead.
Yeah, lead.
No, not you. Him.
Me?
Yeah.
This thing's already fallen off. Well, people have seen me this whole time.
Okay, if you don't want to.
By the way, Persian nobles, Persian kings, they can wear a turban with ribbons and pendants hanging. Okay, when it says Jesus Christ had, many crowns, what it's picturing is a Persian king with a turban and all these different ranks he's got. They'd even wear, that might be like a sash with a particular pennant. It's not Jesus Christ with a bunch of these on his head, which would look stupid, and if he went like this, they'd fall off. Okay? My reference for that, I think, is Kenneth Wiest. Anyway, okay, come on. In fact, I know it's Kenneth.
We're celebrating. Go ahead. We are the same.
Go Israel! Watch it, the walls just came down. And the second advent just happened. You ever see those guys in churches that do the sound booth? They got like over 100 of these levers and stuff. I figured if anyone ever gets the right combination, that's going to trigger the rapture. Okay, any questions or anything? We're still on camera.
I was asked, in chapter 9, verse 32, it says, the decree Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. What book is that?
Well, it does mention 2 verses later, the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Media and Persia. It could be, I don't know. Eventually it became a biblical book, or scroll as it's sometimes called.
Okay. All right, I'm going.
I don't know exactly what it is. It's probably the laws, the law book for Media and Persia. Okay? I will mention, that's a good question. It brings up something. A lot of times we don't understand exactly what something is, but the Bible was written for everybody, but it was written to people who understood these things. In other words, the original writers or readers would have known exactly what that is. Like I tell people, if I said 9/11, would you know what I meant? If I said 9/11, would you know what I meant? Okay? If I said to you Pearl Harbor, October 7th, January 6th, you know these aren't just dates or locations, they're events. And there is some of that in the Bible. If I said, where were you when the lights went out, how many of you know what I'm talking about? I just want to show of hands. Where were you when the lights, what was the occasion?
It was the power failure.
Yeah.
It was in Brooklyn.
Oh, yeah.
It was in New York. Big one.
Great Northeast Blackout started in Toronto,
I forgot.
November 9th, 1965. If I said Ratton Collegiate, who would know what I'm talking about? Rat. If I said someone got beaten up for wearing rat shoes, would you know what I'm talking about?
No.
See? There was a time when I was with people who would know exactly what I was talking about. In the Bible, when it comes to setting up certain holidays and stuff, even the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and I've mentioned that before here when I went over the feasts. They're trying to figure out when you do a certain thing, when you celebrate something, what, God was telling Moses, Moses and those people knew exactly what God was saying, but it's, years later, as the Pharisees and Sadducees are trying to hash it out, they couldn't even agree on certain things. And that had to do when one of the feasts be celebrated. Because it's written in such a way, and it's an ancient language, but the people back there knew. The people to whom it was written originally read it knew exactly what God was saying. And that's why I always encourage learning history, learning language. All these epistles, they're written to people that knew what all these things are, that knew the custom. Let's say when a Roman boy hits puberty, he takes off a toga and puts on a new one that's got a different color on it and stuff like that to show he's now a Roman citizen. And so there's a whole lot of that in the Bible. And, nothing took place in a historical void. Here you got Ahasuerus and he goes on a 180-day party. Well, why? Probably because he's getting ready for the campaign against Greece. And that might have appeased his gods and, in case I don't make it back, whatever.
Was that Xerxes the second?
I think the first. Wait a
The
minute.
first.
I got it.
Xerxes the first.
Yeah, Xerxes the
That's
first.
Salamis, right? He got his navy plunged into the...
Yeah, I think that's that. And I'm trying to learn all this history. And there's a lot of it. And if you don't know, here's what happens though. Some false doctrines are based on not knowing these things. And I mean just, especially it's this silly stuff you see. Okay, on Facebook there's this thing about Yahweh. You breathe in, you breathe out. Okay, because of the consonants. Well, what people don't know is, they should know, Hebrews always pronounced the vowels, you just didn't write them. Hebrew is a language where basically it's a bit of an oversimplification. You don't write the vowels, but you always pronounce them. And they just look at the consonants and try to pronounce it and sometimes it gets really stupid. And I've had to go on Facebook, hey guys, here's what's really going on. These are the consonants and the vowels aren't there because the vowels weren't added until like the Middle Ages or something, when Jews were forgetting how to pronounce Hebrew, and some people came up with a voweling system, all those dots and dashes and everything. But there's a lot of this that this didn't take place in a void, in a historical void. So all these things that I've taught, about that, like you get 11 Herods in the Bible, 3 of them are called Herod. You get 2 Agrippas in the Bible. One is called Herod, one is called King Agrippa. You get 2 Herod Philips in the Bible, and if you don't know the difference, you get them mixed up. The people that were reading the scriptures after they were written, they knew all that. Mm-hmm. It wasn't history, it was current events. So they knew which Philip it was, the Herodias and the dancing girl issue and everything, what John the Baptist was complaining about. It was not Philip the Tetrarch. It was another son of Herod the Great called Philip, who was not allowed to reign, that she divorced because he wasn't going anywhere. And she married Herod Antipas, who was going. He had already gone somewhere. He held rank. And there's all kinds of stuff.
So Josephus comes in handy.
Yeah. And that's why I can't stand it when someone says, oh, I got my either Bible or King James Bible, that's all I need. And I feel like saying, yeah, it sounds it. Can you tell me the 2 Herod Philips in the Bible? If you can't, then you need more than the Bible. The Bible never says, this is all you need. That was a reaction. I think a lot of this is a reaction. I mean, it's the only word of God, but it's a reaction to really the Roman Catholic Church had come up with this infallible teaching magisterium and papal succession and stuff like that. And as far as they were concerned, they could say it and then it was true.
It was a bunch of bull.
Well, the popes only did it twice in 2,000 years anyway. As far as speaking ex cathedra, I've read they've only done it twice in 2,000 years, once in the 1800s, once in the 1900s. But they did believe they were infallible in their teaching, and Luther said no. And actually Luther, I don't even think it was papal infallibility, it was conciliar, it was their councils. Papal infallibility didn't even come out till after Luther, that the Pope can't be wrong. And if you think that's not a problem for evangelicals, you've never been under that Pentecostal teaching that here is an apostle, and anointing takes over him, and he can't be wrong. I spent 12 years in an organization that taught that off and on. Okay? And it was great because of Baptist doctrine, you know, you must be born again, the Trinity, the deity of Christ. But their leadership was based on a particular Pentecostal doctrine that's just as plain wrong. But there's, you know, the point is you got to know the history and all that stuff. And to fully understand what you're reading, you can't just say, all I get is my Bible and the Holy Spirit in me. Well, okay. Name me the 11 Herods in the Bible. Or just even something simple. How come there are 3 people named Herod in the Bible and they're not the same person? Okay? You can't figure that out. You need more than your Bible and the Holy Spirit. And that's not blasphemous because it was never, and it was always written to people who knew all this stuff. Mm-hmm. We're the idiots. Not the ancients weren't idiots, we are. Sometimes. No, we are. Mm-hmm. You know, we come archaeologically, we come against something we couldn't do today. And we think they were a bunch of ignoramuses? Kidding me? What happens is we lose information over time.
Right.
We do. We lose information. Mm-hmm. When the Europeans came to Central Mesoamerica, they found a civilization more advanced than their own. Cities in Europe didn't have anything like, you know, like the so-called Indians in Central America had. And there's a lot of that stuff there. Pyramids they found a few decades ago that, you know, perfectly, without any mortise, without anything in between, stones perfectly smooth, perfectly matching, quarried way away, and taken there with cranes that couldn't do the job today, supposedly. I mean, at least when I read that in a book from the 90s. Information gets lost. They found what they think is a navigational computer in the Aegean Sea. You know, it's all covered with like rust or stuff like that, but they can look at it with X-rays or IR or however they do it.
So make a movie about it.
Yeah, well, I've read also, you know, Columbus, that famous painting of Columbus with at the helm or something like that. The helm wasn't invented till later. You get into this a lot in the movies. They'll show you a World War I movie, and here's a Jeep that wasn't made till 20 years later or something. But here's the point. You can't just, I mean, the Bible will do a lot for you, but you got to understand it in its historical context, in its linguistic context. There is a cultic teaching that started developing around the 1950s. Thank you, Peter Ruckman of Pensacola, Florida. There was an old teaching called Latin Vulgate only. You know, Roman Church of the Latin Vulgate, read that and don't look at the original languages. Ruckman resurrected that as King James only, and I've been in some of their churches. And they're great, I mean, they're missionary minded and everything, they can be great. When you start talking about the original language, you're a heretic. Mm-hmm. Okay? You think you know more than the King James translators? Yeah, actually, I probably know Hebrew better than any of them because I used to have to speak it every day. Okay? And probably do. It's just an update anyway, probably the last Bishop's Bible of like, I forget what year it was. But it was, we Christians, modern Christians here in the U.S. even, are shooting ourselves in the head with some of our teachings intellectually. And I don't mean liberalism, you know. I hate liberalism. But look at Paul. He quoting the Greek philosophers time and time again. He was not an idiot, and he showed that academic passion can coexist with spiritual passion. Mm-hmm. Yes. It's that these great awakenings we've had and stuff, you know, you get these frontier meetings and you get maybe simpler people and that whole culture takes over, you know, and then on the other side you got all these pseudo-intellectuals that are doubting the Bible. No, be like Paul, okay? Mm-hmm. I say we got too many Peters and not enough Pauls these days. You know, guys like Peter who are great at evangelism and couldn't even get their own religion straight. You know, Paul had to confront them. he could not, Peter, I mean, in some ways, he did not understand this is a new covenant, this is, we don't have to keep Jewish law. Eventually he did. But we get a whole lot of Peters and sometimes not enough Pauls. That's the way I look at it. Anyway, anything else? So
Yeah, I have a question.
what?
What are your thoughts on what other feast day is this comparable to?
Purim? Okay, eat a lot. Well, Passover a little
You
bit.
got it.
Passover, you're eating.
If you look real close, this is on the 14th day of the month. Passover
Oh yeah.
starts on the 14th day of the month. And it's a resemblance of the salvation of not just Israel, but the world. All right, go ahead, whatever it is you're thinking.
No, it is. And what's the 14th day, astronomically? Full moon. Passover, full moon. I'm serious. These are lunar months. 14 days, you get a full moon.
We have 2 8 hours this year.
Yeah, they do their leap years by adding instead of I think it's 7 times every, no, it's 9 times every 17 years, or 7 times every 19 years, I should know that. They add an extra month, because it's not a true lunar calendar, it's a luni-solar calendar. Lunar calendar is what the Muslims use, that's why their holidays can occur any time of the year. 28 days and that's it, and you got a Ramadan right now.
Yeah,
But it can occur anytime, because it's strictly lunar. Ours is strictly solar. This is lunar corrected for solar, so it's luni-solar. They add leap months, Adar the second, Adar too. They use a Roman numeral too.
So the Jewish calendar is a combo.
Yeah, at least that's what's used now. In fact, is this year a leap year? I think it is.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah,
13 months.
Adar 2.
Oh, yeah, we have
Okay.
February 29th.
I see Adar 2 right. Adar 1, which ended on March 10th. Adar 2 started on March 11th. So it's a leap year. They add a whole lunar month.
Yeah. And they get away with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, God didn't lay out,
That's
at least the law of
confusing, right?
Moses.
What do you do, celebrate your birthday twice?
No. Hey, be glad you're not born on February 28th, and it's every 4 years you have a birthday. February 29th, yeah.
Well, I celebrate twice.
Okay, if we're done, I'm at least going to turn that off. Any more questions?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. That was good.
God bless you. Thanks for the costume.